Curious about tariffs? Let's break it down today and explore the impact on consumer finance. Welcome back to Headlines in Fine Print, the show where we don't just skim the headlines, we dig into the fine print. I'm Dion Williams, President and CEO of Piedmont Advantage Credit Union, and I'm glad you're here. Just as a reminder, before we get into today's content, we have the show archived on our YouTube and Spotify channels if you'd like to learn more or listen to past episodes. I'd also like to encourage you to follow our channels, like, and share if you're so inclined. With no further ado, let's talk about tariffs. So let's begin with a pretty basic question. What are tariffs? A tariff is a tax imposed by a government on goods imported from other countries. So think of it as a toll at the border. If a company wants to bring in steel from abroad, they pay a fee, and that fee makes the foreign steel more expensive. And that ideally would encourage people to buy domestic steel instead. So purpose is to influence trade, and historically speaking, tariffs were a cornerstone of early United States economic policy. Governments use tariffs for a variety of reasons, but let's look at two for our discussion purposes today. One is to protect domestic industries, and it may level the playing field against less expensive foreign goods. And a second is political leverage in trade negotiations. So far we're talking at the headline level, but now let's shift the conversation to the fine print, which is the impact on consumers and companies. So regarding economic impact, when tariffs go up, imported goods become more expensive. Thus, higher consumer prices can result, which can span any number of categories, including but not limited to foreign cars, electronics, or even food. Then there's the potential impact to the supply chain. Companies that rely on parts from abroad may struggle to keep their costs down, which may ultimately be passed on to the consumer. And last but not least, retaliatory tariffs can make our goods more expensive abroad, and that adversely impacts domestic exporters. So that brings us to the question of, are tariffs good or bad? And it's not for me to say whether tariffs are good or bad, because it truly is in the eye of the beholder. What's good for one side may be bad for the other. Domestic manufacturers competing with less expensive imports may view tariffs as a lifeline, but consumers or companies that rely on foreign goods may view the tariffs as a tax hike. And as we've seen throughout history, from the view of policymakers, tariffs are a tool. So now let's bring it full circle. And it brings us to the question as to how our behavior as consumers may change as a result of tariffs. Do you rush out and buy a new car out of fear that prices are going to increase? Perhaps if you are already in the market for a car and thinking about it, you may choose to buy sooner rather than later. However, if you weren't in the market for a car and it wasn't in your short-term or mid-term plans, why would you want to make a reactionary, expensive purchase that may not be necessary? And similar to the current situation in the housing market, mortgage interest rates have been elevated for some time, and folks who have the really low mortgage interest rates are not inclined to sell or move since they have a great rate on what they already have. And that's caused some supply issues in the real estate market. And last but not least, regarding investments, do you change your investment strategy as a result of what's going on with the economy? And I'll just make this point. Earlier in the show, we discussed tariffs as an economic tool. And this year alone, we've seen tariffs announced, retracted, negotiated, and it's been somewhat of a rinse-repeat cycle. The markets often move faster than we can keep pace, so we intend to buy low and sell high, but it doesn't always work out that way. Timing the market's very difficult. So let's go back to a previous episode of Headlines in Fine Print when we talked about economic uncertainty. Our theme of that show was to stick to your habits. From my perspective, your participation in your retirement plan is more important than trying to time the market. Keep setting aside money for rainy days in a savings account. Over the long haul, there will be hills and valleys and rate changes and market corrections, but your habit of savings will be rewarded, and the rest is just noise. That's not to say or acknowledge that economic conditions influence other areas of everyday finances. If food prices are up, maybe you pack your lunch or eat at home more often rather than dining out. Major purchases may be delayed because of elevated prices or financing rates. Everyone's situation is different, but staying true to your savings plan and adjusting to spending to weather the storm can help put you in a more favorable position on the other side of that storm. Slow and steady wins the race, while trying to keep pace with constant change can give you whiplash. Thanks so much for tuning in to Headlines in Fine Print today. We took a high-level look at tariffs and explored the fine print of impact on consumer behavior. Economic policy can have unintended consequences or impact beyond our control at the consumer level. And that's where we adapt, but not overreact, and stick to our long-term plans. Don't forget to follow Headlines in Fine Print wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep pushing past the headlines and lean into the fine print where the story lives. Have a great day.